everyone, welcome back to our RBT training. So before we wrap up DTT, I wanted to touch base on an equally important, if not as important or more important, teaching procedure called incidental teaching. Incidental teaching has actually been shown in research to be more effective than DTT. However, some people will definitely argue that. I think both of them have their place. But remember, when we were talking about the prerequisites for a child to take advantage of DTT, that there are some very specific things that make it a good teaching procedure for them, right? The child is incredibly distracted and they really need that intense one-to-one structured teaching session in order for them to learn. Sometimes incidental teaching is difficult for those children who really have difficulty attending because working within the natural environment is just not going to be conducive to learning for them. But in general, using naturalistic teaching has shown great effects for kids who it is appropriate for. So I definitely want to talk a little bit about it. And it's something I think that's going to be more easy for you to understand, as it's not so foreign and scientific, because it's pretty much what we use in our day-to-day world with kids to teach them about things. It's also what we consider naturalistic teaching. So incidental teaching is not a therapy in itself, but naturalistic teaching technique used in some therapies. No specific teaching method is applied. Rather, naturally occurring opportunities for learning are maximized, and the child's attempts to behave in a desired way are increasingly reinforced the closer they get to the desired behavior, right? Kind of sounds like shaping. Incidental teaching is based on applied behavioral analysis therapy, okay? So the key here is that unlike direct teaching trials, where it's teacher directed and everything is set up beforehand and prepared for the child, naturalistic teaching uses naturally occurring opportunities, okay? So, for example, if there's a ball on a shelf and the bubbles and the child is sitting there next to you going, and you use some sort of name procedure, oh, what do you want? And you help them sign ball, good, and you get the ball and give it to them. That could be an example of using a naturalistic teaching or incidental teaching, okay? It was in the moment, it wasn't contrived, you didn't purposefully set that up, or maybe you kind of did just to make it more likely that they'll have to make a request for it because it's out of reach, okay? But it wasn't necessarily structured to do so. Incidental teaching is suitable, like we said, for people of all ages who have autism or developmental delays, or typical kids, really. You can use this, with your everyday munchkin who's just learning language. But it's typically, within our field, used for children whose ages range from 2 to 6. So incidental teaching is used to improve language and other communication skills in children with autism. It also aims to help children transfer skills from one situation to another and to encourage them to start conversations. Real generalization starts to apply because it's in the moment. They're learning that, when they request the ball, that they can get the basketball or the soccer ball or other things right in that moment. So they're learning, but it's also really using their motivation, because as we talked about with man training and teaching that initial language, it is so important for them to want that item, okay? And that's why one of the reasons why incidental teaching is so successful is because it really uses those self-interests, and because they're really valuable, those self-interests, it creates more motivation for them to learn the skill. So that's kind of the idea behind it. Incidental teaching is based on the idea that if a skill is rewarded, a child will use it more often. All natural teaching techniques assume that a child will use skills more easily in a wide range of situations if those skills are learned in a natural environment like playtime, instead of a highly structured setting like a clinic. Incidental teaching relies on the child's natural interests as the basis for learning, with the teacher following the child's lead. So, what does it involve? Incidental teaching involves using several steps to improve communication skills. So, one, we set up an interesting environment for the child, such as a play area with lots of things that we know that they enjoy to use and that they're likely to request. And then two, we restrict access to those interesting objects in some way, right? So we put them higher on the shelf, or we put them in clear containers with hard tops that are hard to open. Three, the learning begins when the child asks for an object or makes a gesture, okay? So remember, that's part of that behavior. We've got our antecedents, which are, remember going back to our DTT now, there's some similar things but different. Our antecedents are setting up the environment in a way that gives them more opportunities to learn, right? Putting things that are harder to access out of reach, things that we know that they like. Then the behavior we're looking for is when the child asks for the object or makes some sort of a gesture towards them, or a sound or a grunt, or pulls you or pushes you out of the way, right? And then our prompt, what do we do, right? Typically it's like, oh, what do you want? Or try again, or maybe just giving them a look, like an expectant look. And then the behavior or the response. So you're waiting until the child responds. I want the ball, or bubbles, or my turn, okay? Or put it on top, or put it in, or car, or faster, go slow. All of those are languages that would be acceptable responses. And then, of course, the consequence, or the reward, right? Or our error correction procedure, where maybe we help them use the appropriate language, whether it's using a visual icon, a sign to gesture, or a verbal word or phrase. So incidental teaching can be incredibly useful, but it can also be very time intensive. It might require many hours a day depending on the needs of the child. It can go on for several years. Cost considerations, the cost of naturalistic teaching approaches will depend on the type of intervention or program used. ABA programs using incidental teaching will probably involve a high cost because they're time intensive, right? You're going to set aside a therapy time for that kiddo to play with you for a good 1 to 2 hours. And remember, you're following their lead. So sometimes they might completely lose interest in something else. So you're going to have to figure out, okay, what else can we work on here? What else can I get this child interested in? Or, you know, maybe they need a break in between and they just need some time to play by themselves. So it's following the child's lead that might increase the length of time that you do this program. And like we said, quality research shows that this approach has positive effects on behavior of children with disabilities and autism. And be sure to read the journal article that's attached to this afterwards, okay? All right, so leading into this, I want to talk about another type of intervention that is very similar to incidental teaching. And here it's called pivotal response training. So pivotal response training was developed by Robert Kogel and Lara Schreiberman. It's an empirically validated treatment. That means that it's based on the principles of ABA techniques, and it's shown to demonstrate progress in learning certain skills. PRT builds on learner initiative and interest, just like incidental teaching, and is particularly effective also for developing communication, language, play, and social behaviors, okay? The components of PRT are very similar to incidental teaching, and that we have those antecedents that are gaining the child's attention, exercising something what we call shared control, okay? So there's a balance between the therapist and the child. The instructor and learner have opportunities for turn taking and choice making. Essentially, there's a volley. Okay, there's play. They're going back and forth with the items, and it's used in that teaching process. The instructor generally maintains control of some components while relinquishing control of other components to the learner. Okay, this also increases the motivation. So, for example, if you were teaching a child how to use a car ramp, and maybe you're also working on them requesting with the car, then what you would do is maybe you would have all of the car pieces first. Okay, you'd have control of all of those, and then you'd have the car ramp there, and then the child would literally have to ask you, car or my turn, and then you would give them a car. They could put it on the ramp, it goes down, and you take it again, and then they have to make a request again. But then after a few turns, then maybe you give them the cars, and then they have the cars, and then you make requests of them. My turn, or give me car. They give you the car, you put it on the ramp, right? Make some really fun cause and effect for them, so it's reinforcing some motivation to give them you a turn with their favorite toy. But that's really what that shared control is. I'm not sure if you saw the video yet of me working incidental teaching with a child, but she's really motivated by this ball toy. And so what I have is I have the balls in my lap, and what I'm doing is I'm waiting for her to make a command or a request for the ball. And as soon as she does, then I give her the ball, she gets it, and she gets to put it into the ball machine, tap, and she plops it, and it goes down, okay? So PRT really takes advantage of student motivation as well. And that's part of why it's called that pivotal piece, because it's so pivotal that we use a motivating stimuli in order to get them to respond, and hence pivotal response training. Okay, using those things, we can teach a variety of other skills off of that pivotal behavior. Okay, all right, so up here I'm going to put a T-chart. I've got one on there, so I'm going to just add to the T-chart. One side I'm going to put PRT, and on the other DTT. So let's just go over the differences between the two. So PRT and DTT. So first, DTT is teacher directed, right? There's no shared control. There's no volley back and forth. So the opposite of that for PRT is that we have that shared control. This is not quite as motivating as shared control, right? Where we also use child-directed, and motivating stimuli to teach, right? So for example, when I was working with the child and we were working with the ball toy, she had asked to play with that ball toy, and I was like, awesome, the likelihood that she would acquire that language. But with teacher directed, obviously, you know, we've got structured programs and stimuli that we're working on, and we really rely on that first then phrase, like first the program, and then you can have access to something that you want, or that token economy. And like sometimes we get creative, right? We'll bring in some preferred stimuli, things that they enjoy seeing. But typically, the stimuli in themselves are not going to increase the value of learning that skill. So along with that, we use repetition to teach skills over here, right? Repetition is key for DTT. The more access they have and opportunities to be reinforced on the presence of that learning skill or stimuli, the more they're going to learn it. But over here, this is kind of an ebb and a flow. You go with the flow. Sometimes they might be requesting for an item and then you have to leave it and you're not going to get in a few more trials because you're just there, it's not that valuable to them anymore. So another thing is going to be more success with generalization, because again, it's motivating for the child in PRT. So we increase so for example here, like that with the ball, she's going to learn that she can request probably a variety of ways to get that ball, right? That she can point to the ball, that she can use a sign to gain access to the ball, and I might reinforce all of those because those are all appropriately ways to request the ball. But over here in DTT is pretty specific, right? So either our goal is to teach manding, teach pointing, teach verbally requesting, teach a receptive skill to receptively identify which one is the ball, they touch the ball, or expressively, what is it, ball, right? So here we're missing that ability to really generalize skills because we are so targeted and narrow. We target skills, okay? And last but not least, one of the most important, I believe, is the environment, right? This is going to be a structured and set up environment, whereas PRT is natural, which also helps to support our generalization. Okay? So if you can, I want you to definitely make a SAFMED card for incidental teaching. Our SAFMED card should be, I can write it up here for you. Incidental teaching is when naturally occurring opportunities in the environment are maximized or are used to increase learning. Okay, this natural piece is so important because it's naturally occurring opportunities as well as in the natural environment. Okay, all right, so be sure to read the journal article about